Good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for coming today to share in the gratitude we all feel the time we had with Bill Wulf. Bill was an amazing person, and I know he would be honored that you're all here. Bill's life, his work, and the meaningful ways in which he interacted with so many in the engineering community has left a resounding impact, and his absence will be felt forever. I want to thank Bill's family for graciously choosing the National Academy of Engineering as a place to honor Bill. To Bill's wife, NAE member Anita Jones, his daughter Karen Wulf and spouse Chris Grasso, his daughter Ellen Epstein and spouse Stephen Epstein, and to Bill's 4 grandsons, Jack, Ethan, Henry, and Abe. Thank you for allowing the NAE to celebrate the life of your husband, your father-in-law, and your grandfather. Bill was a multifaceted individual who distinguished himself in so many ways. In leadership, as president of the National Academy of Engineering, in academia, as a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Virginia, in the federal government as assistant director at the National Science Foundation, and in entrepreneurship with his wife Anita as co-founder of Tartan Labs, which was later purchased by Texas Instruments. Bill's list of achievements in engineering is long and admirable, and he was a pioneer in computer science when the field barely existed, and he flourished with the burgeoning field. Bill was elected to the NAE in 1993 for professional leadership and for contributions to programming systems in our computer architecture. When I think of Bill and all he has accomplished, I think of the phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants, which I believe was a term used by Sir Isaac Newton. This metaphor means using the understanding gained by major thinkers who have gone before in order to make intellectual progress. And Bill was one of those giants. He earned one of the first doctorates in computer science and is the first PhD recipient in computer science from the University of Virginia. He developed crucial advances in programming languages and compilers, and he played a leading role in shaping the future of computer science, education, research, and national policy. Bill was a major thinker, a thought leader, visionary, a change maker, but first and foremost, Bill was a good person, just an outstanding person of high character. He was a husband, father, a mentor, a friend. And in these myriad roles, Bill touched the lives of so many individuals in so many different ways. We have gathered a number of individuals who wish to share with Bill's family and the engineering community their personal memories of Bill and the positive influence he had on their lives. Some of these individuals are in person, others were unable to attend in person and provided video remarks. I will present them all since they tell a more complete story of Bill. Our first 4 speakers will focus on Bill's time with NAE and the role he played in moving NAE and the engineering community forward. The remaining speakers will address specific aspects of Bill's career and life. To begin, I introduce Norm Augustine, former chairman and CEO of Lockheed Martin. Norm was the NAE chair when Bill became president of NAE, and he will share his memories of Bill's successful efforts to leading and getting the NAE back on track. Norm, please join me at the podium.
Bill Wulf was a friend of mine. We rarely had the opportunity to work together day to day, but we served on numerous committees together and worked on causes which we both cared deeply. And in the small world category, Bill and I were both woodworkers. Bill's impact throughout his life was enormous, and particularly during his days with the Academy. Bill's impact was felt in fields that spanned from education to business, from software to public policy, from engineering to leadership. And Bill was a pioneer, and as you've heard, he was a pioneer from the very beginning. He was the first person to receive a doctorate in computer science from the University of Virginia. And that's what's known as making a bet on the future. Many aspects of his quite remarkable career are actually not widely known today other than perhaps through a few words. Words like bliss and ARPANET and Hydra. You'll recall that back in those days, most people still thought that a mouse had 4 legs. But Bill always seemed to be at the leading and cutting edge of his field. And probably there are very few members of the Academy of Engineering that are even aware of the profound impact he had on our organization following what were probably its darkest hours. They occurred at the end of the past century, and it was by happenstance I had just been elected chairman of the Academy's board, and it was a period that I certainly will never forget. A new president of the Academy was elected at the same time largely through a write-in vote. And let us simply say that things did not go well in the months and years that followed. Even the relationship between our Academy and the Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine, as it was known in those days, became badly fractured. Eventually, it became necessary to revise the NAE charter by a 2/3 vote to make it possible to impeach the president of the Academy. And indeed, that vote took place, followed by another 2/3 vote to actually remove the president. It was that environment that the board set out to find an NAE member who could hopefully repair our badly fragmented organization and bring it back together, all while settling lawsuits and rebuilding our relationship with the NAS and the IOM. It quickly became apparent to the board that that person was Bill Wulf. And it was to our board's immense relief when Bill agreed to take on the job of being interim president of the Academy of Engineering. And so successful was he at his leadership that he was asked by the board to run for another term, full term, which he did, and of course was elected overwhelmingly. And it was his leadership that played a major role in restoring the Academy to the stature that it had always enjoyed. Each of us that cares about the Academy owes a great deal to Bill for his wisdom and his courage and his leadership during a very difficult time. And as it happens, Bill also had a major impact on my own life. Although he had all these difficult problems before him, from lawsuits to relationships, he established a committee on ethics and engineering. He asked me to chair it. This was a topic of the utmost importance to Bill and typical of his interests. And he established a group that consisted of engineers, a federal judge, professors of psychology, professors of philosophy. And it was an experience that any of us who were involved will probably never forget. Bill didn't let the matter go with the creation of a committee. One of his last acts before he finished as president of our organization, Bill created a permanent body to address links of engineering and ethics. And in another of his final acts, he established a committee on America's competitiveness in the competing world. The committee established the Gathering Storm report that dealt with America's declining position in competitiveness, and it was one of the first real wake-up calls about what was happening, particularly in engineering and science. My involvement in that particular effort that Bill asked me to undertake really formed the shape of much of what I've done since that time during my retirement. And I'm very indebted to Bill for giving me that opportunity. And while Bill's everyday responsibilities and his remarkable performance were substantial indeed, one gap did evidence itself in his career, throughout his career. And it was presumably a result of the fact that most universities don't teach engineers Latin. And that gap stemmed from the fact that Bill never did apparently learn the meaning of the word pro bono. I feel very fortunate to count Bill and Anita as very dear friends. Thank you.
Some of us who were around at that time when we had difficulties with leadership that Norm was talking about remember so well how Bill just brought us back and righted the ship, and not only righted the ship, moved it faster at the time, and Anita as well. I still remember the optimism that he brought, and they both brought to the organization, and we're indebted to that. Thank you, Norm. Next, we have remarks from Bruce Alberts. Bruce is the Chancellor's Leadership Chair in Biochemistry and Biophysics for Science and Education Emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco. He was awarded the National Medal of Science by President Barack Obama in 2014. Bruce was president of the National Academy of Sciences from 1993 to 2006, during much of Bill's time as NAE president. We are pleased to have Bruce with us today to share his remarks in person.
Well, it's a real privilege to be here. Brings back many fond memories of time spent in this auditorium and this building. Bill Wulf was really a close partner the whole time he was here with me. We have upstairs 2 adjacent offices. I even symbolically placed between them, I bought with my personal money a huge painting of Grand Coulee Dam to say how much we respected engineering. And it was a time, really the difficult times before, as Norm was talking about, before Bill came, brought the 2 academies really closely together, and we worked wonderfully together. Before I get to Bill, I just want to emphasize the enormous role that Norm played. His nighttime job was coming in and negotiating very unpleasant and difficult time to make it possible for Bill to be appointed as the interim president and then the president of the NAE. This is a picture we took when Norm stepped down as chair, and he's holding one of my favorite books. The only problem with this book is if you read it carefully, he extrapolates all these different things. And one of his extrapolations is that the optimum size of a committee is 0 members. Maybe he was right. As everybody will say today, Bill was a warm, wise, incredibly foresighted and idealistic, and also highly productive human being. We quickly became close friends, as I'm going to show you. The first interview I think he had once after he came here was published in CEN, the Chemistry and Engineering News. The next slide, please. And this is just a little excerpt from it. Wulf sees an irony in the NAE year-long fiasco. Quote, "One of the things that has been learned is how interdependent the 2 organizations are. I think the NAS has a heightened sense of its dependence on the NAE. He also claims a close relationship with Alberts. Bruce and I tend to work late at night, and we spend time together. So there's a personal relationship that's every bit as important in terms of actually getting things done as who sits where. This was such a typical thing for Bill to say. But anyway, it's an indication of how we worked so closely together. Next slide. So there were actually 3 presidents. The IOM, now the National Academy of Medicine, was headed by Harvey Feinberg, also a wonderful person. He's currently the president of the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation in Palo Alto. The 3 of us worked really closely together. We met, I think, weekly to try to develop statements for a joint capital campaign and also focus of how we'd spend the money. And this, when you work together like this, you really become friends. And that capital campaign was immensely successful in the end. The next slide shows some pictures of us that I found. One of the features of the capital campaign is we created a president's circle of private sector leaders and philanthropists who made a huge difference. And these are just some pictures of them, the major donors getting Einstein statues because they became members of the Einstein Society. But I think we took 2 trips every year with them to all kinds of places. A lot of them involved engineering. Anita came with us sometime. I remember we went to Seattle to visit Boeing, and we went to Houston to visit NASA. We also spent a wonderful time in New York City visiting outstanding public schools. So we did a whole variety of different activities, and it was really wonderful to interact with Bill there. Next slide. So we are both very passionate about international issues, and I think our most memorable trip that Anita was also on was September 2000, where we led a small delegation to Iran. Then as now, we had no relationships with the 2 governments. The State Department, however, blessed our trip. And we met with their science and medical academy people. We went to Tehran and Isfahan. The actual picture I wanted here was Anita and my wife in the appropriate headscarves, but I couldn't find it. Somewhere in my pile of junk. Anyway, this is the result. There was a statement put out, and we decided to have a long series, it turned out to be a very long series of workshops to work together on important issues. It went at least to 2020. I'm not sure what the status is now. But the basic thing we learned is that scientists and engineers in different countries have the same complaints about their government doing short-range planning and making stupid decisions, and we bonded to the Iranians, and that led to a lot of, I think, hopeful interactions which have had an effect. The next slide, please. So I got a big education. Of course, all of life is an education. And I got a big education about engineering. Actually, my father was a mechanical engineer, but I learned much more about engineering from Bill. I learned about engineering as design under constraint compared to science as inquiry. And very importantly, I learned how engineers play central roles on National Academies study committees. I heard over and over again that on these study committees, which are supposed to come up with concrete recommendations, too often the scientists want more research before we decide what to do. But the engineers wanted to get it done. So they were important influence, and they still are an important influence on Academy committees. A great value of bringing us together in a common set of tasks. And finally, I learned the great value of combining science and engineering when talking about educating young kids, pre-college, to have a combined set of science and engineering standards. unlike the standards that we developed when I first got here, the National Science Education Standards in 1996, the 2012 revised standards combine engineering and science starting at age 5. So a very important development. I think Bill had a lot to do with that, and as a way of infusing joint understanding between the two disciplines. Okay, my last slide, I think, comes next. Next slide. Okay, to summarize, as you'll hear over and over, Bill Wulf provides a wonderful role model for others. He leaves us a great legacy to build on as we face the tremendous challenges ahead for the U.S. and the world. He'll be badly missed. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bruce. I think it's clear and well known in the academies that Bruce and Bill built a bridge between NAS and NAE that, to my knowledge, didn't exist before. I was elected just before that bridge was built, and so we're indebted to Bill and Bruce for doing that, and that legacy has lasted till today and even gone further. For most in the National Academy community, Bill was remembered and revered for 11 years of service as NAE president from 1996 to 2007. Bill brought creativity and thoughtfulness to the position, and he brought strong guiding principles, and perhaps most importantly, he brought vision. I was a newly elected member of the NAE when Bill became president. Our organization was in need of strong leadership, which Norm Augustine has mentioned, and Bill provided. And what I remember most about him is the three important characteristics of leadership that he had: commitment to do the right thing, enthusiasm for the work, his work and his colleagues, and optimism. All three were needed at the time. Bill made numerous advancements at NAE, which are best told by Lance Davis, former NAE executive officer. Lance was unable to attend in person, but he extends his heartfelt condolences to the Wulf family. Bill hired Lance, and together they served as a team for 8 years as Bill worked to rebuild NAE. And here's what Lance has to say.
My name is Lance Davis, and I'm pleased to say a few words in memory and appreciation of Bill Wulf. At this point, I've had a 31-year association with the Academy of Engineering, and it's been an enriching experience. It was infinitely more enriching because I was fortunate to serve as the executive officer of the Academy from 1999 to 2015. I owe that responsibility to Bill, who hired me as executive officer in May of 1999. So I served Bill for the last 2 years of his first term as NAE president and for the 6 years of his second term. Bill was a joy to work for. He was considerate and kind. He was intelligent and creative. He was a leader who one could follow with enthusiasm. And he was committed to the notion that the NAE should serve the nation and the engineering profession. Anyone who knows a little about NAE history knows that Bill assumed leadership of the NAE at a tumultuous time. The elected president was impeached and removed, and Bill started as interim president in 1995 and then was elected president by the members in 1996 and re-elected to a full 6-year term in 2001. It was a difficult time for Bill in the first term because the council seemed to be at a loss for what to do to right the ship and not particularly supportive. But Bill came with experience in business and academia and government, and most importantly, he came with ideas. The first NAE strategic plan was created under Bill's guidance. He was committed to the idea of diversity in the profession and the NAE before it was a prominent national concern. The NAE gave increased attention to the election of women and minorities and created the Engineer Girl website to interest and inform young girls of what an engineering education and career could mean to them. After 20 years, the engineer girl just received an award from the NSF as an outstanding program. He was worried about the macroethics of emerging technologies before AI was a doom and gloom topic. He brought the Online Ethics Center from Case Western Reserve University when it needed a new home, and the center became a go-to source of information for people interested in both science and engineering ethics. He wanted to he wanted to challenge engineering educators to think about ways to improve engineering education. He negotiated with the National Research Council for the NAE to assume leadership of studies of engineering education, which led to the consensus studies of the Engineer of 2020 and Educating the Engineer of 2020, both of which promoted the importance of teaching engineering principles up front, not burying them under 2 years of math and science, so the student had no idea what an engineering education was all about. It eventually spawned the Change in the Conversation report, which was a revelation that an engineering career should be promoted to potential students as a creative enterprise that improves quality of life, not as a reward for being tough enough to pass a gauntlet of math and science courses. He was concerned with technology literacy and helping the public to understand what engineers do and what engineering is. His efforts of public understanding of engineering led to the greatest achievements of engineering of the 20th Century Project, joined with the professional engineering societies, which led to a website and to a massive tabletop book funded by NAE member Bob Brisker. It received a fair amount of attention because, as someone said, Americans love lists. Even more important, the Greatest Achievement Project spawned the Grand Challenges of Engineering Project, a look forward rather than a look back. The Grand Challenges created a vision for the importance of engineering for the future and went viral as engineering educators sponsor Grand Challenge Symposia for students. Bill's successor promoted the Grand Challenges, and the Grand Challenge Scholars Program evolved, giving the NAE a direct connection to undergraduates it hadn't had before. And Global Grand Challenge Summits were also created in cooperation with the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Chinese Academy of Engineering to promote a vision of the importance of engineering worldwide. The Grand Challenges projects that Bill initiated spawned these outcomes. And he wanted to nurture the careers of young engineers so they had a better appreciation of what the engineering enterprise is all about, not just their little piece of it. Bill enhanced the Frontiers of Engineering program to provide an international career development experience for young engineers by expanding the U.S. only to bilateral meetings with other countries. The members of the NAE had the good sense to elect Bill Wulf as a member in 1993. They were rewarded for that good sense by Bill's outstanding service as NAE president from 96 to 2007. Bill created a prototype for what the NAE should always aspire to be. I conclude by offering my condolences to Anita and to Anita's and Bill's family. Thank you.
As Lance noted, the NAE is indebted for what Bill did to move NAE and engineering forward. Equally important are the powerful words Lance used to describe Bill. Quote, he was considerate and kind, he was intelligent and creative, he was an enthusiastic leader you wanted to follow. It sums it up. I will now share a video from Barbara Schlein. Barbara was Bill's senior executive assistant. Working alongside Bill daily, she had a very personal look into the man, his work, and his leadership.
Hello, I'm Barbara Schlein, and I had the privilege of working as senior executive assistant for Dr. Wulf, who insisted on being called Bill, from the fall of 2003 until he left the NAE presidency in 2007. Others will speak of his many lifetime achievements, technological and otherwise. I knew him, though, as a brilliant, kind, and generous boss. He arrived at the office with a bounce in his step and a smile on his face. Bill would often say, I have the best job in the world. I would venture to say, though, he enjoyed each of his jobs, for it was obvious how much he enjoyed teaching and mentoring students. In working with Dr. Wulf, I personally gained a better understanding and an appreciation for science and engineering and the distinguished members we served. Dr. Wulf was quick to forgive my mistakes and was complimentary of NAE staff, his colleagues, and others. He seemed to find and focus on the good in people and their talents. It was clear through the programs he supported, he respected diversity in women. I believe, at least in part, that's due to his wife and partner and her many accomplishments, Dr. Anita Jones. In my experience with Dr. Wulf, family came first, whether it be a telephone call or a coveted speaking engagement. And he allowed me to put my family first. I am forever grateful for having the opportunity to work with Dr. Wulf and the Academy. Thank you, Dr. Wulf, for the positive impact you have had on my life and so many others through your work and just by being Bill.
Those are very moving words, very sincerely spoken. And Barbara is with us today. We thank her for joining us and providing her genuine observations and sincere feelings. The remarks by leaders and co-workers show that the profound impact Bill made on NAE, his colleagues in the field of engineering, just outstanding. Now, please join me in welcoming Bob Sproul, former Vice President and Director of Oracle Labs and current adjunct professor in the Manning College of Information and Computer Sciences at the University of Massachusetts. Bob was on the faculty of computer science at Carnegie Mellon when Bill was a professor there. Bob?
Bill Wulf was a teacher. He grew up in Chicago, and as an undergraduate at the University of Illinois, he fell in love with computers when a classmate dragged him into a class that he knew nothing about as a companion. The instructor noted Bill's ability and zeal and invited him to be a teaching assistant for a subsequent class. And this is where Bill fell in love with interacting with students. And in fact, in an interview, Bill said, "Those two love affairs shaped the rest of my life." Now, some of you may question whether computers can inspire love. Today, they're ubiquitous and perhaps unremarkable. We take them for granted. But in the early 60s, they were few and varied, and they had a lot to teach. For example, the engineering of the Burroughs 5000 machine, long extinct, now sometimes called colloquially the B5000, was ahead of its time, presaging high-level programming languages that eclipsed low-level handwritten machine code. And Bill was later seduced by a B5000 at the University of Virginia, but that's a little bit ahead of my story. At Illinois, Bill was invited to stay for a master's degree, and after that he wanted to teach and started looking for a suitable posting, a place that advertised they had a computer, so you could teach about computers. Of two opportunities, he chose the University of Virginia. I should say, parenthetically, not many places wanted a master's student to come teach in a university department, but UVA did. Shortly thereafter, UVA started a PhD program, as you've heard earlier today. Bill was their first student. And after he finished there, he again went looking for a place to teach. And this time, he received an offer from Carnegie Mellon University. Bill recalled that Alan Perlis, one of the fathers of the just-started department at Carnegie Mellon, avidly supported hiring him. I suspect it is not a coincidence that Perlis was noted for his insistence that faculty be good instructors, good teachers, I should say. CMU Computer Science Department prided itself on collaboration, especially among faculty members. Preparing a proposal for a single ARPA grant at the time was the way it was done to support much of the department research was a focus for inviting and designing collaborative research. Bill created collaborations with his students as a group. His first bunch extended a goal that he had started on his PhD thesis, namely to make programming languages and their compilers generate code that was as efficient as handcrafted machine code. That project, as you heard from Norm, was called BLISS. We won't go into the acronym. It generated working code, several PhD theses, and a book, a perfect collaborative result. He later led work on optimization at Tartan Labs, more of that in the future, that produced a compiler that exceeded human performance at generating microcode for commercial integrated processor chips. These projects introduced optimization techniques that can still be found today in open source compilers that are available to all. Alan Newell, the department's principal statesman, then asked Bill to take on charge of a second project, building an operating system for a 16-processor multiprocessor under construction called C.MMP, and overseeing commissioning of the machine and doing the research to evaluate its performance. Again, Bill led a gaggle of students, theses, and book writing, and although the machine itself was short-lived, it was unique for its time and taught lessons about multiprocessing that are visible in today's multi-core computer chips. In both of these cases, Bill made a point of celebrating the end of these collaborative projects, usually with a party and a symbolic act such as turning off the power on the multiprocessor experimental machine, and shutting down a project frees up talent to work on fresh problems. If you ask them, Bill's students and colleagues will be happy to bend your ear about his technical contributions, but they all prefer to remember personal interactions with him. The culture of the computer science department at the time embraced the reasonable person principle. This was probably introduced by Alan Perlis, but others echoed and institutionalized it. Mary Shaw, whom you'll hear from later, and who was a key disseminator of this principle, defined it as holding that reasonable people strike a suitable balance between their own immediate desires and the good of the community at large. When I was on the CMU faculty, I felt that Bill was the reigning embodiment of the reasonable person principle. You ask yourself, what would Bill do? Bill was welcoming, inclusive. He was gracious, available, approachable, supportive to students of any stripe, whether he was advising them or not. Sam Fuller, a junior faculty member at the time, remembers that Bill was the only colleague to visit him when a funding crunch threatened to delay or derail research, and to advise him on how to navigate the disruption. When Bill, together with Anita Jones and John Nestor, founded Tartan Labs, a startup to deliver optimizing compiler technology for multiple languages and computers, he strove to retain the inclusive collaborative feel of the CMU department. Later in today's program, in the video clips from dozens of graduate students, actually a sample of dozens of graduate students, you will hear these words again. You'll hear that he listened carefully and that he supported rather than directed. Bill Wulf was a teacher. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And collaboration is a word that comes up a lot when you talk about Bill Wulf, and I even think he talked about something called a collaboratory, if I got that right. And I like that term. Sounds much better than a lab or something like that, a collaboratory where people are working together and people from different backgrounds are working together. So, with us today is Kevin Skadron, the Harry Douglas Forsyth Professor of Computer Science and director of the Center for Research in Intelligent Storage Processing and Memory, known as CRISP, at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. He is also the former head of the Computer Science Department at UVA. Kevin will speak about Bill's work at UVA and his contributions to the university, computer science, his colleagues, and his students. Kevin?
Can we go to my slides? Thanks. Next slide. So when I joined UVA, Bill had already come up here as president of the National Academy, but he invited me to co-advise one of his students, actually his last formal PhD student, Dee Weichel. And so we interacted quite a bit, and of course he was in Charlottesville quite a bit, so I had the chance to collaborate with him in person. And I learned a great deal about how to be a successful professor from Bill. I'll talk about that in a minute. But when I joined, it very quickly became apparent to me what a profound influence he'd had in his time at UVA as a professor, not to mention as a PhD student, both on UVA and the department, but also on the research community through his research. And I won't go through all of the bullets here, but it's interesting to note that shortly after he joined UVA as a faculty member, he moved to NSF as the Size AD. And he wasn't back at UVA terribly long before he was recruited to be the president of the NAE. So that he was able to launch so many of these projects, each of which had important impact, is really incredibly remarkable. I'm most familiar with the first two, on understanding the interface between the processor and a computer's memory that led to the observation about the memory wall, as he and his student Sally McKee nicknamed it, and led to the streaming memory controller work. And the key insight here is simply that with the processor and the memory physically separate, the amount of processing power and the amount at the rate at which the memory data cells themselves can provide data is limited by the interface between them. And this bottleneck is specifically what they described as the memory wall. And this led to the streaming memory controller work, and some of these ideas are now commonplace in the way that microprocessors interface with memory in the memory controllers, and has led to new research to integrate processing together with memory, and that's a focus of industry even today. He also helped launch a major initiative to harness computers to work together in federated ways that allowed you to have different types of computers that would share resources, and this was known as grid computing, and each user and each facility providing resources could customize both the resources and the security policies. That helped launch a startup, Avaki, that a fellow faculty member, Andrew Grimshaw, led, and informed later work on global file systems that's in use today in supercomputing facilities, and presaged some of the key ideas in cloud computing. He also did important work on microarchitecture, continued his collaboration with Mary Shaw on programming languages, and I think we're going to hear from Mary shortly, and a variety of work on security that has influenced not only the grid computing work, but also cloud computing environments. Next slide. He also had a profound impact on the curriculum at UVA. He was thinking throughout his career about how to teach students better, and this led to the design of a new computer science curriculum at UVA with an emphasis on integrating topics that had previously been somewhat separated in typical CS curricula, and in particular understanding how data structures and algorithms are represented and executed in the hardware. And so, for example, when you create a linked list or an array, what does that actually look like in memory? how does that actually get processed by a sequence of assembly language instructions and so on? And so the most central course in this concept combined classic data structures and introductory computer architecture and assembly programming. It inspired efforts elsewhere, and it was really viewed by our students in CS as a rite of passage. Next slide. Whether he was working with undergraduate students or graduate students, he wanted to help students find topics that they were excited about. As many people have commented, maybe closest to Bill's heart was being a teacher. And he wanted to help students find something that excited them and help guide them in directions that would maximize the opportunity for impact. So he really truly embodied the idea of an advisor as well as a teacher in every way. And he cared about students not just as researchers, as academic beings, but as whole people. He really cared about what they were concerned about, what was going on in their lives. And so when you met with him, it wasn't just a dry technical conversation, but it was really a personal engagement. You knew he cared about you as a person and he cared about your success. And that was true for me as well as a junior faculty member. Next slide. So what I learned from Bill in my career as and in particular as a brand new faculty member, and you've heard hints of this, I think, throughout all of the conversations about Bill so far. Don't just do what others are doing. The best way to have real impact is to solve a problem that others are overlooking rather than adding a delta onto something that many other people are working on. And this is particularly important, I think, in academia, where we can't marshal large engineering teams. And so the path to impact is to try to find some new dimension that can really help the community at large advance its understanding of an issue or come up with important new insights. And of course, key to this is not just finding something that's new, but finding something that people care about, or even better, something they don't know they care about yet, but they'll recognize as being important once you start to bring these insights into the community. And so to make this a little more concrete, the advice he gave to me and gave to many students, according to stories that they've told me, is to think about the long-term impacts of technology trends or new technology and try to think beyond where the current industrial and academic research community is thinking. And in particular, this article that I linked here refers to that. And again, you've heard about this before, in particular from Bob, but he wanted to make sure I knew that even though I had a tenure clock ticking and that tenure was based on research in a significant degree, that education is really the most important part of a professor's job, and that it was important not to lose sight of that. And one of the best ways to be an effective educator is not just to give clear lectures and good assignments and so on, but to really care about your students and what's on their mind. And I think that is my last slide. That's a good place to wrap up. So let me just conclude by saying that I feel immensely privileged to have had the chance to have Bill as a colleague and as a mentor, and to have had Anita as a colleague and mentor. And I want to express my condolences to the Wulf family and really to the engineering community at large, because we've lost a leader and a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Another theme comes up, education, and the fact that Bill was interested in undergraduates and graduate students and research. Everything was together as a continuum in a sense. And I think Bob Sproul also commented on students of all stripes. And so he was truly an educator. From 1988 to 1990, Bill served as Assistant Director for the Computer and Information Science and Engineering Directorate, called SICE, at the National Science Foundation. He was instrumental in facilitating the transition of government-built computing networks into what became eventually known as the Internet as we know it. Bill was also a leader in promoting diversity in the education of computer scientists, specifically, and engineers in general. Please join me in welcoming Margaret Martinosi, who currently holds the position at NSF that Bill held in 1988 and 1990, Assistant Director of the NSF SICE Directorate. Margaret?
So I speak here today as a really grateful member of the CS research and education community, and my heart goes out to Bill's friends and family. First, I wanted to talk about Bill's role and Bill's voice on the topic of diversity in engineering. In 1994, I joined the faculty of an electrical engineering department that was over 100 years old and yet had never had a tenured female faculty member. When Bill became NAE president 2 years later, in 1996, he started using his NAE role as a place to speak about the value of diversity in our field. And let me tell you, I'm sure many of you remember, we didn't talk about that back then. He was unique. And in particular, his speeches on this topic didn't just talk about diversity's value on me, on the underrepresented individuals themselves. He talked very effectively about how important diversity was to the engineering design process as a whole. How having a diversity of backgrounds and ideas and opinions was important to how we designed systems, was important to the engineering outcome that resulted. And indeed was central to everything we do as engineers. So as a young, pre-tenure woman, faculty member, one of only two in a department with over 30 faculty, it was extraordinary to be able to hear the NAE president speak in this way. It was really unheard of. And it changed how I felt about my department and about my field. And by being able to point to Bill's words and invoke his way of presenting these ideas, we were able to change how our university and how many universities approach these issues too. So I say thank you, not just because of myself, but I really want us all to multiply this out in our heads. Think about how many individuals he changed. Think about how many design processes he influenced. And then think about all the users of all those design solutions that were improved by the diversity in the room that he helped to cultivate. We'll never be able to count up the better engineering solutions. We'll never be able to appreciate how many lives were improved, but we can imagine that the numbers multiply out and are huge. So I also stand up here today serving a 4-year term, leading the computing directorate at the National Science Foundation, which is called the Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, which we shorthand to NSF SCIES AD. So NSF created the SCIES Directorate in 1986 with Gordon Bell as its first SCIES AD. And a couple years later, Gordon helped recruit Bill Wulf to be NSF's second SCIES AD, to be his successor in that role a couple years later. So to have Bill and people like Bill be predecessors in the role that I now serve in is incredibly inspiring. I work every day to continue that legacy. Bill's impact on our world in that role was huge, and we could spend a long time enumerating different aspects of that impact. But the one big one has already been alluded to, and that is that Bill was instrumental in the rollout of NSFNet. So this was the process, the phase by which NSF catalyzed that nascent set of ARPANET-connected sites and started rolling it out across American college campuses. This rollout took ARPANET from a few nodes to hundreds and eventually thousands of campuses connected. And the scaling of connectivity across university campuses was key to advancing science on those campuses, but also key to democratizing access to science, which is a theme that we all work on, that NSF works on to this day. It was also obviously just hugely influential on the overall scale of the internet as we now know it. So I speak as the current SCIES AD, and I look back on this kind of impact with awe and with gratitude. And I want to end just with a simple thank you. Thank you, Bill, for your expertise, your vision, and your leadership, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Margaret. Margaret hit on a very important point and a legacy, another legacy of Bill Wulf, and that is his bringing the awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion to the attention of the engineering community in general, especially the National Academy of Engineering. He also, in his writings, talked about the value of diversity in creativity and the connection between creativity and diversity. We owe him a lot, and today we have many programs that are trying to advance diversity and inclusion, and they all come back as Bill Wulf's original ideas, and he is the source of that. So extremely grateful to him for that, as is the profession. Now, Vince Cerf is Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. I never heard of that term before, but if you know Vint, he can make up any term. So he is recognized as one of the fathers of the Internet, but he values himself as a friend of Bill and Anita. And here's Vint in his own words.
Hello, my name is Vince Cerf. I'm Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. But more important, I was a friend of Bill Wulf's and Anita Jones, and I value this opportunity to just tell you about my friend Bill. He was, first of all, one of the nicest guys you could possibly imagine. Always cordial, a statesman in many of his jobs, especially as the National Academy of Engineering president and in his role at NSF, to say nothing of his role as founder of the Tartan Labs and also a professor at the University of Virginia. Always a thoughtful and pleasant person to be around, great sense of humor. And he loved to teach. I think that his biggest and most important thrill was getting an idea from his head into the head of the student and then convincing himself that it actually delivered successfully and the student was showing the sparks of recognition and discovery. I always enjoyed my time with Bill in casual settings and in more formal activities. He was always focused on productive activity and never lost his sense of humor, which, by the way, is sort of fundamental to surviving in the complicated world we live in today. So I know Anita misses Bill, and I do too. So I'm sorry I can't be there with you to celebrate Bill, but I want you to know I'm thinking about him and will remember my time with him with great gratitude.
Vince said it well. Bill was a statesman, and he loved to teach. Bill's unwavering quest for knowledge, his relentless interest in computing, and his steadfast belief in empowering all students to reach for their full potential made a profound impact on the lives of many people, many students. Let's listen to what his former students have to say.
Bill Wulf was my PhD advisor and mentor at Carnegie Mellon University.
I am Bill Wulf's last formal graduate student from UVA.
Bill Wulf was my advisor when I started at Carnegie Mellon University in 1977.
I was a student of Bill Wulf's.
Bill was my PhD advisor.
Bill Wulf was not my faculty advisor, but he was definitely my mentor.
Bill was my doctoral advisor. When I think of Bill Wulf, I don't think about the director of CISE or the president of the National Academy of Engineering, or even the guy that helped move the internet from being a government resource to bringing it into public use. I think about the guy that had a huge heart and a dry sense of humor, and that cared deeply for his family and friends, and that made such a difference in my life. Most folks can count on one hand those that have dramatically changed their lives. Bill and Anita are at the top of my list. I was blessed to have known Bill Wulf and to have him play such a big part in my life. I miss him tremendously, and my heart goes out to Anita and the family.
Recalling my graduate student days, I remember Bill's enthusiastic support, his focus on excellence, his camaraderie, and particularly his wisdom, which in the ensuing half-century has been my steady companion. Our paths have not crossed regularly since our CMU days, but I miss him greatly.
I still benefit every day from what he taught me and from the example he set. Bill Wulf was a one-of-a-kind educator, advisor, mentor, software developer, entrepreneur, technology pioneer, visionary, and engineering policy leader. I'm proud to have worked with him and grateful to him for starting me out on the research path which became my career.
Bill was foundational to my growth as an academic in two orthogonal ways. He held himself and those around him to high standards, while simultaneously being very supportive of my quite peculiar interests. Bill, thank you for showing me what true excellence looks like, and for letting me strive for that in my own contrary way.
William Wulf was a fantastic role model, a marvelous technologist, and a wonderful human being. His job was to teach, but the best teaching he did for me was by example, and it made a big difference in my life. Bill could not have been more gracious, accommodating, and encouraging. He made me feel like a peer, a trusted colleague, and not the green newbie grad student that I actually was.
Bill Wulf was an amazing advisor. He listened first, asked questions second, and explained third. He gave advice more than direction, and hope always before admonishment. I quickly learned that his comment, "I can't see that yet," was actually the closest he would come to telling someone they were wrong. Consistently humble, he loved his work and was never fully aware of the genius he embodied. He celebrated everyone's success. Share credit and hoard blame was his mantra. I have the technical status of being his last formal graduate student, but I know he continued to teach, advise, and inspire until the last moment. I miss him, am extremely grateful to have known him, and will never forget his gifts not only to my family, but to our world. I am intensely proud to be a member of the Wulf Pack. Thank you, Bill.
Above all, Bill was kind and generous and had a wonderful, wry sense of humor that made people laugh. I miss him very much, and he leaves behind a rich legacy of people, ideas, and institutions.
Nice. One of Bill's former students who was not featured in the video recently remarked, "The loss is personal as well as professional to me." Bill was my thesis advisor, along with Alan Perlis. His research style and values had a large impact on mine, in particular starting me on the path of questioning conventional wisdom, a strategy that has served me well. He was a mentor, a collaborator, and a friend. My former student is with us today. Please welcome Mary Shaw, the Alan J. Perlis University Professor of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University and recipient of the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, the nation's highest honor for achievement and leadership in advancing fields of science and technology. Mary.
So thank you, John. It's good to see you, Anita. It's an honor and a privilege to be here to talk about Bill. I came to talk about Bill and education. We just heard from several of Bill's students about his impact on them. Others at the University of Virginia have also told me about how gracious Bill and Anita were to new faculty and students, going out of their way to welcome them and to show them ropes in the new department. As Bob Sproul said, Bill was a teacher to his core. Bill was a thesis advisor to about 36 PhD students at Carnegie Mellon in Virginia. These students went on to distinguished careers in universities and in industry. His academic advisees and their descendants have graduated more than an additional 250 PhDs, as well as uncounted master's and undergraduate students. Bill taught his students to frame questions in new ways. I echo here things that you had heard 2 or 3 times earlier, but this bears repeating. To look at problems from different points of view, to take views that are not constrained by the conventional wisdom, instead of doing the natural next step advancement of past practice. And he coupled this with an engineering sensibility about practical solutions, finding good solutions under constraints. And the point of view extended to education as well as to research. For example, in the late 1970s, at Carnegie Mellon, Bill and I had been collaborating on research that developed an innovative approach to a certain class of programming languages. We found the area of abstract data types where we showed how to think abstractly and in principle rather than in terms of the detailed implementation at the computer level. So at about that same time, the software faculty had grown disenchanted with the sophomore computer science courses, which was about data structures and was very much taught in terms of the implementation and not about the principles that led to those implementations. So our research had showed us a new and principled approach to that course material that allowed us to teach a new course in which the ideas and the principles could be shown to rigorously lead to what had previously been taught, just as implementation. Our lecture notes became the first textbook supporting this novel approach, and I recognize in what Kevin said about the UVA curriculum intellectual thread that goes from what we had learned there to what he took to Virginia in the 90s. So after Bill's return to the University of Virginia in 1990, which was interleaved with terms of public service here in Washington, and I think that he and Anita took turns coming to Washington for public service because it seemed like all the time one or the other of them was here. But he continued to bring to his educational work the habit of questioning conventional wisdom. And so I'd like to pick out just a few of the efforts in which he was a leader or a principal contributor, and in which creative, innovative connections of new ideas led to novel outcomes. In the mid-1990s, as Kevin has described, Bill and a group of his Virginia colleagues led a major reconception of the undergraduate computer science curriculum, which was intended to instill a clear sense of engineering for large software systems. And in addition to refreshing the content to focus on realistic software and rigorous reasoning rather than simple classroom textbook examples, they revised the pedagogy, most notably by introducing closed laboratories similar to science laboratories, in which students would use modern software development tools and would learn to work together in teams, skills that would serve them well in the world. Bill believed that computer science should be collaborative, that it should be accessible to everyone, really everyone. At NSF, he was instrumental in opening the previously closed NSFNet computer network to wider use, as you have just heard. In later years, he advocated for computing laboratories that support geographically distributed collaborations, which he called collaboratories. And he was particularly interested in making computing resources, which, remember, were still scarce at that time, available to people of all backgrounds and in all disciplines, and in particular in the humanities. And I think he gets a lot of credit for being a principal supporter and founder of the area of digital humanities. And he argued for diversity on the grounds that creativity depends on making unexpected connections, and that diversity enriches the connections that can be made. This bears repeating. Bill took great joy in teaching. He designed and offered interdisciplinary courses that attracted students from across the university, such as a popular undergraduate course at the intersection of engineering and policy that he offered at the University of Virginia and the Liberal Arts School. At the National Academy of Engineering, he established the first standing committee on engineering education. He spearheaded the NAE's technical literacy movement, and he supported scholarship on engineering education. The vast range of contributions, including these and others, was recognized in 2014 by the Carl Karlstrom Outstanding Educator Award, which is the highest educational recognition of our professional society of the Association for Computing Machinery. The citation reads, William Wulf is recognized for contributions as a teacher, author, and national leader who focused attention and changed the national education agenda and in the process supported the needs of underserved and underrepresented students. Bill reported that this award was the most meaningful of his many awards, in part because of two early mentors, Alan Batson at the University of Virginia and Lloyd Fosdick at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, of whom he said, they made me realize the impact that an individual faculty member can have on the whole life of a student. Ever since I became a faculty member, this has kind of been my gold standard. So for all the students on whom Bill had significant impact, thank you, Bill, for all you taught us, and especially for the critical eye that helps us find fresh ways and fresh opportunities in the world.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Bill inspired so many and in so many different ways. He brought joy and candor, inspiration, innovation, leadership, and camaraderie. I now would like to invite Bill's daughters, Karen and Ellen, to the stage to share with everyone their memories of their father.
On behalf of our family, Ellen and I thank you for this generous tribute to our dad and for this opportunity to reflect on his life and work. We especially thank John, Kelly, and Michaela here at the Academy, and Rick Stillings in Charlottesville, who put together the marvelous slideshow. We know that some of the themes we'll emphasize here will echo comments of folks who have already shared about his life and work as an engineer, a colleague, a leader, and a teacher. For us, these themes were present in our dad's whole life. They reflect his qualities as a person and the core commitments that animated him. First, he was a child of opportunity. He was always aware of, thanks. He was always aware of, but perhaps even more reflective about this later in life. Yes, he was very talented. And yes, he was super hardworking. But he also had exceptional opportunities. He believed and spoke and wrote, in particular, about the importance of public higher education opportunities for everyone.
In an interview several years ago, Dad said that in grade school and high school, he was a good but not great student. The historical record, which we have checked thanks to our grandmother's relentless archiving of my dad's life, suggests that may even be a bit generous. The truth is that like many talented kids in tough situations, school wasn't where he put a lot of energy. Our grandfather was fully disabled by Parkinson's disease by the time my dad was in middle school, and their family was hanging on to the lowest middle class, in part because his dad belonged to a union, and in part because people in programs were very generous to him. Then, the University of Illinois at Navy Pier gave him an amazing start, and he never forgot that.
Second, he was a teacher who deeply appreciated the role of his teachers. He believed in the power of a teacher to change and support a student's life, incrementally or profoundly. He made the leap from Navy Pier, essentially a community college, to the University of Illinois, largely because a teacher saw talent and was willing to give him another set of opportunities. And at Illinois, the same thing, a boost into graduate school, which he said he'd never considered, as out of his family's limited economic means.
When I think of him, I always think of him as a teacher first. As such, he rarely met a situation that didn't lend itself to a teachable moment. Yeah, see? When I graduated from college, I moved to Northern Virginia. I was just starting out. I had no furniture. Aside from gifting me some pieces that they were no longer using, my dad took me to amazing furniture, junk shops, to look for treasures. He taught me to find quality items hidden beneath years of neglect. We happened upon a stockpile of dressers that had been surplused from a local college, and a project was born from using Grandpa's recipe of highly flammable wood stripper to many trips to gather supplies. Every step was filled with his knowledge about wood. Of course, it was more than that. It was about sharing his knowledge in a collaborative and hands-on way to make something beautiful together. It was so much fun, we ended up getting a second one, gifting it to my sister. We both use our dressers and treasure them to this day.
Third, he was a builder. He came from a family of builders, and he loved, of course, to see things come to shape, bringing ideas into reality. That was true of intellectual projects, but also of actual physical stuff, too. When we were small, we lived in a community in Pittsburgh that had a country club, to which our neighborhood of junior faculty at Pitt and CMU and engineers at Westinghouse definitely did not belong. So our dad and a small group of other parents got together to add a pool to our little community association. And when I say they got together to add it, a friend just sent us a copy recently of the bond that each of our parents took out to help fund it, which was cool. Even cooler, and this is a dad pun, trust us, was when they went swimming in the pool in February when the foundation was finally solid. Alas, we don't have the pictures in that slideshow. The bathing suits from the 1970s were awesome.
He loved woodworking, which he never got to do enough of, but was quite accomplished at. He built us a tree fort with bars and a rope ladder, things he expressly said girls should do: climb, scramble. You may have seen the wood shop he had in Charlottesville with his own tools, but also tools from our great-grandfather's building business. Many of you may know the story of the six-sided table my father built for their study in Charlottesville. While an excellent opportunity to flex his woodworking skills, this was also a chance to put one of his core values into wood. He wanted students to work with them in collaboration, and a table with 6 equal sides was representative of each of them literally coming to that table, not as teachers and students, but as collaborators working problems together.
Fourth, he was an expert who appreciated experts. Part of his opposition to the firing of UVA's president, Terry Sullivan, in 2012 was the disrespect that the university's board had shown for the expertise of higher ed professionals. He had a strong sense that people who know their stuff really know their stuff in any line of work, whether in the government or industry or other academic disciplines, which is what he was familiar with, or wherever. He also thought it was a massive mistake to think that expertise is generalizable, that you know enough about X to be the expert when your lane has been Y. Not that people can't expand and learn. He did. He learned business and government, both of which shaped his career ambitions. But he appreciated the importance of expertise and respecting it, of whatever kind and whoever had it.
The term lifelong learner gets thrown around a lot, but I can't think of my father without seeing a man who continued to learn his entire life and deeply respected the expertise of others. When my father and Anita moved and built their house in Charlottesville, one thing he really wanted was a vegetable garden. Now, knowing my dad, as many of you do, it was no simple vegetable garden. It required clearing the land, which required massive machinery. My father was thrilled. There were months and months of intense research on just which types of plants would thrive. Seed catalogs littered every non-work-related surface. While Anita had firm command of the flowers, vegetables were my dad's area. He had previous experience with tomatoes, lettuce, zucchini. Those happened the first year. Then the deer came. Back to research, talking to folks at the local feed store, chatting with colleagues near and far. Some of you may have helped. What do you do about the deer? There were various iterations of fencing, all designed to humanely keep the deer from munching on his veggies. Then came the asparagus. Do you know how long it takes for asparagus to be ready to harvest? Research will tell you.
Fifth, he was a proud American. The child of an immigrant father, he felt he experienced the best of the U.S. He came of age in the post-war period when several things converged. Educational and housing opportunities increased dramatically. To be fair, especially for young white men, Christian boys from Northern European backgrounds like him. It was a period when wealth inequality shrank and the middle class grew dramatically. And there was a sense that racism, so deeply embedded in our country's experience, might be addressed through civil rights, voting rights, and more, and that harsh immigration exclusions might be relaxed too. In other words, he grew up and matured in a moment of incredible opportunity and in the post-war decades when it seemed possible that opportunity could be shared more widely. And this is what he saw as the best of this country.
For as much as he was a proud American, he was also a committed internationalist. Another part of that sense of the best of the U.S. was the internationally diverse group of people he worked with all the time, both people who were, like him, new or recent Americans, and also collaborating with people around the world. When we were young, Karen was in 5th grade, and I believe I was in preschool. We went to India for more than a month while my father was working with colleagues at the Tata Institute and elsewhere. It was eye-opening, even as young as we were, and it showed us things about other places and cultures. It gave us a new palate. Well, Karen ate most of what our parents ate. I ate French toast for a month straight. I do now appreciate all sorts of food, just to be say my palate has improved, as well as all art, culture, science, and more.
Sixth, he was one half of a partnership. In an interview a few years ago, Dad was remembering working on that multiprocessor that was mentioned, a project that, as he remembered it, Alan Perlis, his senior colleague at CMU, and Gordon Bell, then at DEC, handed to him to oversee. And he described Anita coming by his office with, quote, a handwritten, penciled piece of paper that defined the notion of capability-based protection. And I just fell in love with it, he said. Well, we're sure he did love that notion, but he also loved the notioner. Dad and Anita worked side by side with shared interests and passions for almost 5 decades. One of these was a mutual commitment to the common good. As they wrote in a joint op-ed in Science some years ago, specifically about the importance of scientists and engineers becoming involved in government and community service, everyone has a contribution to make. Shouting from the sidelines does not work. And if the technical community does not engage, we will get what we deserve. Now, I think that sounds a little more ominous than they perhaps meant it at the time, but it's true. We give because we know that the total social good serves us all.
Whether it was the vegetable garden at Quill Spring or the nation's engineering needs, they were partners to the end.
Our dad left an important legacy, not least to us in his impassioned advocacy for what we know makes a better, stronger community, nation, and world. But we want to leave you with this one last thought. A leader, a researcher, a teacher, an advocate, our dad was also an inventor. Yes, he held patents, and he designed languages and programs and curricula, but he was also the inventor of the dad joke. Seriously, do not try to tell us otherwise. We know that Wikipedia gives him credit for collaboratory, but under dad joke, it should also have dad's name there. We lived with these groan-inducing puns.
The jokes were many, but one of his most enduring went something like this. Dad, are you all right? No, I'm not all right. I'm half left. As a kid, this terrified and confounded me in somewhat equal measure. Dad, what do you mean? Only half of you is left? Yep, only half of me is left. So, as we pay tribute to the many aspects of my father, as we honor and miss him, we want to again thank you for the opportunity to pay tribute to a man who shaped our lives and meant so much to so many. And in his honor, we remain forever half left.
Now you know why we put that last, because no one wants to follow that talk. Thank you very much. That was just wonderful, Karen and Alan. Today we celebrate the life of Bill Wulf, and this incredible man left behind a bountiful legacy of knowledge and innovation, kindness, and consideration. Bill will be remembered for all that he has accomplished and for the many lives that he has touched. Some of you are aware that when Bill completed his term as NAE president, an endowed fund was created in his honor. The endowment is called the William A. Wulf Initiative for Engineering Excellence and supports activities that Bill championed. These include engineering education, both in terms of instruction and cultivating an adequate and diverse pipeline of engineers, as you've heard much about, inspiring, mentoring, and providing access for underserved youth, both boys and girls, engaging women in engineering and engineering leadership in STEM, infusing ethics into teaching and engineering practice, and advancing the visibility of engineering and its benefits to society. All things we continue to do based upon his initiatives. A few of Bill and Anita's friends from Section 5, Susan Graham, Ed Lazowska, and Bob Sproul, spearheaded an effort to honor Bill's memory by raising additional funds for the William A. Wulf Initiative for Engineering Excellence. The goal is to sustain the programs that Bill supported and cared about, and to further strengthen the NAE programs aligned with its mission and the things we do today. Susan, Ed, and Bob personally contributed to this effort, and we thank them for their continued support. Thank you. They also recruited others to help, and there has been an overwhelming response to this initiative. I am pleased to share that $2.5 million have been raised in Bill's memory in 1 month. This is extraordinary, at least in my experiences. Many of the donors and friends are here, all of you. I want to personally thank you for supporting Bill's fund and for being here with us today. Anita, I again thank you for choosing the NAE to hold the celebration of life for Bill, celebration of life. We're truly honored to do this, and I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Karen and Ellen, Steve, Jack, Ethan, Henry, and Abe for sharing memories and for being part of today's celebration of life. And I'd like to thank everyone here at the Kavli Auditorium and those who are attending virtually for sharing this moment with us. We're having a reception outside on the West Lawn and under the tent, and I invite everyone to continue to share memories at that reception. The party's not over. The conversation is just beginning. Thank you very much, all of you.